South Korea's rapid ability to test and isolate COVID-19 patients seems to have flattened the curve there for now. As for Monday, there is still optimism. The country is winning the fight against coronavirus. New cases on Sunday fell to just 64, the lowest number since February. Hyundai and Kia have announced plans to create a flexible working system to slow its operations running again, to slowly get its operations running again in their plants. The South Korean government is still banning large religious services, sports and other entertainment events to prevent the virus from spreading. Let's cross live now to our colleague in Seoul, the capital of South Korea, Bruce Harrison. Bruce, a very good morning to you. We're speaking about the curve flattening a bit this morning, but of course we should be cautious about these reports.
Definitely, Desiree. While there is optimism, caution is needed as well right now. You mentioned that number 64. It is significant. Over the weekend, we still saw several days, including Friday, where the caseload was above 100 new infections. And this comes after several days last week where there was days above 100 or near 100. And that could easily turn around again. We could see some of those same numbers. It was just weeks ago there was roughly 900 cases a day. So yes, it is a significant step in the right direction. But caution is needed right now, especially because the government still warns people there could be a resurgence of the virus at this point in time. The weather got very warm just in the past few days, and a lot of people have been out in parks, other public spaces, eating, drinking. What kind of seems to be a celebration of the end of winter, the beginning of spring. But it really is breaking down what's known as social distancing, and the government has been keen on keeping people following those guidelines, keeping a certain distance, and we're seeing more people kind of get relaxed about the coronavirus outbreak, especially as we see these numbers fall. So if people don't continue to follow these guidelines, the government is worried there could be a resurgence, perhaps here in the capital, which hasn't been hit too badly yet this far.
I suppose that's the biggest difficulty, isn't it? The changing of social norms and people not knowing, whether this is temporary or permanent.
Exactly. It's really challenging. You have to ask yourself, how long can we actually expect people to stay indoors? Korea, unlike some countries we're seeing now, which have issued shelter-in-place orders, never did that. They isolated people who tested positive for COVID-19, and they encouraged people to practice better hygiene, whether it was wearing a mask, washing their hands more often, if they were on public transportation, practice social distancing. But there was never an order to stay in their homes, to only go out for necessary reasons like groceries or to a doctor's appointment. So, Koreans weren't as bottled up. But yeah, we've seen this warm weather and people rushed outside. The weather drew them outside. And it does raise risks for a potential resurgence, especially as Seoul is not fully aware of where all the viral cluster infections could be located throughout the country.
We were saying in our introduction about Hyundai and Kia reconsidering opening their operations, albeit at a smaller scale. This is a real concern, isn't it, for business in terms of the impacts? What have been the impacts on business, Bruce?
Well, it's been pretty devastating here. A lot of the big corporations have a bit more of a buffer when it comes to a downturn in the market like this, but small businesses, small and medium businesses are really struggling and on the edge, many closing their doors, and the government has announced a lot of emergency funding, tens of billions of dollars to try and prop them up while spending is down. Maybe now that this warm weather has arrived, we'll see more people going out and helping some of those small shops. As far as the bigger companies like Hyundai and Kia, this is a baby step. They've asked some of their workers to begin working from at their offices as opposed to working remotely at home. A lot of that is office employees. But like I said, a baby step in trying to get operations back online because they have lost a significant amount of revenue with factories and assembly lines halted. Like I said, a buffer. Hyundai, Kia, they have other factories abroad. They have had to shut some of those down as well. But really, the economic impact can be felt most significantly with these small mom-and-pop stores here in Korea.
And now there's a conversation about the possibility of a global recession. How is this conversation finding resonance in South Korea?
Well, like I said, the government here has announced a significant amount of support for local economies to try and see them through this time. South Korea is an export-driven economy. If there's a global recession, there's no doubt it's going to hurt badly here. We saw semiconductors lead export growth last month, which was an unexpected rebound considering the circumstances here. But really, in the months to come, we'll have a better idea of how South Korea's export economy is going to survive. Right now, the outlook is pretty grim, and a global recession only extends a negative outlook for this economy. South Koreans desperately rely on a few large corporations to produce cars and other technological equipment for export abroad and sale. And if we can't sell those because of supply chain disruptions, as well as other difficulties because of COVID-19, it's going to be a very, very bad year.
The social distancing is a bit of a new one here in South Africa. How are the South Koreans tolerating this time of restrictions?
I think they've been, well, one, when it comes to respecting the government's guidelines, they've been pretty respectful. They've done a good job abiding by social distancing orders, practicing proper hygiene after taking public transportation, whether it's a bus or a subway. But like I said earlier, the question is, how long can you expect to keep people bottled up before they, find ways to stretch their legs? And in this case, it was the warm weather here that really drew people out. And I think a lot of focus on those social distancing practices kind of went out the window in the short term because it was such a relief to get outdoors, to stop worrying immediately about whether the person next to you may be a carrier. And part of that anxiety has lifted here because the case numbers falling daily. But it's still too soon to be relaxed about practicing proper social distancing and other guidelines to make sure that Korea fully wins the fight against COVID-19. Still way too soon.
Bruce, thanks for talking to us this morning. Bruce Harrison is our correspondent coming to us from Seoul in South Korea. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases in South Africa has risen to 274. The Health Ministry released the latest figures last night. The latest numbers do not contain detailed information